Hello and welcome to Arcanine Rides. As a longtime skateboard and longboard rider, electric skateboards have always interested me, but I never ended up buying one because frankly, I thought I'd be disappointed. The popular mainstream boards like Boosted or One Wheel always seemed underpowered and overpriced. So when UDITER sent me out this S3 to test and review, I went into it expecting this board to be a mildly amusing EV that I used long enough to review and then didn't touch again. But luckily, I was very wrong. This board is an insane amount of fun and I've been riding it non-stop since I received it. I'm no e-skate expert, but I have ridden non-electric skateboards and longboards for years, and I've obviously ridden dozens of other PEVs, so this review will be from that perspective. With most PEVs that companies send me to test, I like to ride them as much as possible with as little info as possible, including price, so my first impressions can be as unbiased and genuine as possible. With this board, I was so impressed with the quality and performance that after the first couple rides, I just assumed UDITER had sent me one of their more expensive boards. So when I looked it up and saw that the S3 is only a $600 board, I was pleasantly surprised. Let's take a closer look at it and break down what I like and dislike about this board. The S3 is an electric longboard with a 38-inch long, 10.8-inch wide deck. I definitely prefer larger boards and really like the size and shape of this one. There's plenty of space for a nice, wide, stable riding position. The deck is bamboo and fiberglass and has a decent amount of spring and flex to it, which are great qualities for a longboard. The deck sits over 5 inches above the ground, so it's quite high, but this does make sense given all the electrical components built into the bottom of the board. It comes with 8-inch reverse kingpin trucks, which is pretty standard for longboards this size. I'm no expert when it comes to trucks, but these seem to be good quality. I like to run my trucks a little tighter for stability at high speed, but I found these to be very stable at high speeds even when they're a little looser. The deck and trucks make the S3 feel responsive and smooth while cruising and carving. The front unbranded longboard wheels are 90mm in diameter and according to UDITER's website are softer 78A wheels. Both characteristics are pretty typical of longboards like this. I am a big fan of bigger and softer longboard wheels for handling potholes and low curbs. Before I jump into the electrical components and performance of this board, let's look at the S3's remote. First off, it's a good looking remote with a carbon fiber look plastic for the main body and these bright orange buttons and acceleration wheel. It has a decent sized display that shows speed, a trip and total distance odometer, as well as the battery level for both the board and the remote. The charge on the remote lasts a super long time. I've ridden for about 2 weeks almost daily, only charging it once during that time. That was mostly out of paranoia that it was going to die while I was riding, but it hasn't gotten even close to dying at any point while I've had the board. This wheel style throttle and brake is new to me, but I really like it. It's a really natural motion to accelerate by rotating the dial up and brake by rotating the dial down. The resistance of the spring inside the wheel seems perfect, and I feel like I have a lot of control. The board responds well to small movements of the wheel. The double 600-watt hub motors are built into the rear wheels. From what I can gather, the hub motor boards are the cheaper option for electric skateboards, with the more expensive ones being belt-driven boards. However, these hub motors have generally performed well, offering decent torque and great top-end speed. With these being hub motor wheels, not having the option to potentially swap the rear wheels out for whatever wheels I want is a bit inconvenient, and if the rear wheels take a lot of wear and tear, they will be expensive to replace, but I guess that's just what comes with this style of board. The S3 is available as a belt style board as well for a couple $100 more, so that is an option if you want. Let's talk performance now. The advertised top speed is 28 miles per hour. While I could get it going that fast, bombing a hill with the throttle pinned, the board's tested top speed on flat ground was around 24 miles an hour, with it sitting in the low 20s most of the time while I was cruising. That still is a really respectable top speed and actually feels quite fast on a longboard. More than 25 miles an hour begins to feel sketchy given how small longboard wheels are, especially on sidewalk or ground with potholes and uneven surfaces. I never felt like I needed the board to be faster on flat ground. The acceleration is pretty impressive as well. While I do have a lot of riding experience, it took me a day or two to get fully used to how zippy the board is when taking off and how to properly distribute my weight for accelerating and braking. The board has 4 speed modes, each with a different tier of top speed and acceleration. I started with mode 3 for the first day or two to get used to accelerating and braking, but mode 4 is where the fun is, and it's the only mode I use now. The electronic braking is a bit finicky, and while it generally does a good job at slowing down the board smoothly and quickly, it does have some unusual behavior when braking from high speed, especially going downhill. I found that from speeds above 24 miles an hour, engaging the brake even fully slows down the board very slowly, and then once the board slows down to around 20 miles an hour, if you already have the brake engaged, it causes the board to stop super abruptly. I experienced exactly this, where at the end of a long hill, the brake wasn't slowing me down enough in time to stop for the intersection. So I found myself having to foot drag like you would with a normal longboard to stop myself. Once I slowed the board down enough for the brake to engage properly, it engaged so abruptly that it almost threw me off the board. Because of this, I've had to control my speed very carefully downhill to avoid this happening again, kind of feathering the brake as I carve down hills. I don't know if this is a common quirk of all electric boards or a purposeful feature of this board to help riders avoid braking too hard from high speeds, but if it is purposeful, I feel like it hurts the rider more than it helps. The board's hill climbing ability is quite decent on full battery, even though that is supposed to be a weak point of the hub motor skateboards. Even on the steepest hills in my area, I was able to keep up a decent speed of 10 to 15 miles an hour when the battery was at 75 to 100% full. As soon as the battery was at about 50%, I did notice a significant decrease in hill climbing performance. The battery controller and other electrical components are built into the bottom of the board, naturally. The S3 features a 7.8 amp, 328 watt hour removable battery. This puts the weight at about 20 pounds, which really isn't a lot, but it does make it a little awkward to carry around under one arm while in a store or walking up the stairs. Not a huge issue, but just something I wanted to note. The advertised range is 20 to 25 miles on a single fully charged battery. And as is usually the case with advertised range, I got significantly less than my test. In mode 4 riding, I was only able to get about 8 miles of range. As is the case with almost all PEVs, the advertised range typically reflects a very conservative riding style in the lowest riding mode. Nevertheless, I still think 8 to 10 miles of range is really reasonable for a board like this, especially given the battery size. This should be more than enough to let you cruise around locally for a while, or for a last mile / shorter commute. Let me also touch on some other things I noticed during the range test. As I mentioned, I noticed a decent dip in performance after about 4 miles of riding. It was the most noticeable uphill, where the board would slow to a crawl. The flat ground performance was still fine through the entire battery, though the acceleration took a small hit about halfway through as well. Just keep this in mind if you live in a hilly area or have an uphill commute. Losing a bit of performance as a battery gets used up is common in PEVs, and I don't think it has a huge effect on flat riding conditions. I still got close to an hour of riding use out of the battery. The S3 also has the option to ship with an extra battery, and I actually highly recommend paying for the extra one, especially for commuting. Being able to use the entirety of your first battery to get to work or school, and then have an extra for the ride back home that easily fits in your backpack is a really convenient option. The battery swap is surprisingly easy to do and takes me less than a minute. This board is also IP55 water and dust resistant, so rolling through puddles and riding on dusty or salted roads shouldn't be an issue. Let's look at the other accessories that UDITER sent out to me. The accessories do not come standard with the board, they are an extra purchase, so keep that in mind. One of the big things that UDITER emphasized when telling me about this board was the ability for it to be converted into like a pseudo scooter by installing a set of handlebars. Let me start by saying that I think that this is a really gimmicky concept that very few people will have a real use for, but let me explain this and let's look at it closer. So first, an adapter is needed for the handlebars, and you have to install it by removing the front trucks from the board. I removed the rear trucks on accident in this clip, but by the time I realized it, the adapter was already installed, and also it doesn't matter a ton because the board can actually be used in either direction by flipping the bottom switch on the remote. In any case, the adapter was a pain to install and the grip tape had to be removed to get access to the truck bolts. Once the adapter was in and I screwed in the handlebars, I took it out for a quick little test run, and to be honest, I completely hated it. I actually disliked it so much that I completely forgot to get any footage of me riding the board with the installed handlebars, because I literally took the board back and took them off and then removed the adapter later. Let me just quickly explain what's wrong with having handlebars on a skateboard like this, especially this style of installing them after the fact. First, you stand on a scooter in a much different way than you do on a longboard. Adding handlebars kind of naturally makes me want to change my foot stance, which leads to less control of the board, and you're not actually riding it correctly if you stand on it like a scooter. Next, handlebars on a regular scooter can be turned to help with steering, but these ones on the board can't. They aren't really anything but something to hold on to steady yourself. And while that doesn't seem that bad, I think they promote bad habits if you're trying to learn how to ride a board for real. You have to learn to lean and shift weight correctly, and these handlebars just make everything awkward and don't teach anything. They cause you to rely on them to steady yourself while you're riding, which doesn't teach you correct principles. Applying weight to them also puts a ton of unnecessary stress on the board and on the bolts, and it just made me really nervous to yank them around while I was riding. The handlebars also make a ridiculous amount of noise with like metal on metal jangling constantly, and they're also really short and awkward to grab for anyone tall, so I had to lean way over to touch them, and I ended up putting a ton of my weight on the handlebars while I was riding. So generally, just avoid these. If you want to ride this like a scooter, then you might as well just buy a scooter. But don't let this strange accessory distract you from how great of a board this is. It has been the perfect board to introduce me to the world of electric skateboarding. Definitely give this board a look if you want a fun, quality board at a good price.